Well, thank you very much, everyone. And today, first of all, I would like to acknowledge that I'm here in my home in Riverside, California. Many of you are in Illinois, I'm assuming, and maybe other places everywhere in the US or maybe somewhere else. But I would like to just respectfully and gratefully acknowledge and recognize our responsibility to the original and current caretakers, in this case, here in Riverside, of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples and their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this meeting place is home to many indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and I am grateful, we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these lands. And in this talk today, I will be sharing with you a pedagogical development in bilingual and specifically in Spanish as a heritage language education that I've been developing in the last 10 years already. And I will also describe some of the research that I have been conducting to measure the success of this pedagogical approach. And we know that we have many challenges currently, and we have to also acknowledge that we have achieved considerable progress in recent decades. However, we are living in a wonderful time. Something happened yesterday. I want to acknowledge it. Things are changing. We have a significant opportunity. We are in the middle of a renewed social movement, and this is affecting education and the field of linguistics and language education as well. And within this current movement, sociolinguistic justice has become more, or has moved more at the center. And some scholars have defined or mentioned that sociolinguistic justice is an idealized goal, but it is itself a site of struggle, and this struggle is necessary. However, in general, linguistically marginalized individuals and communities can be seen as achieving some measure of sociolinguistic justice whenever they claim the right to define the social, cultural, and political roles of their own linguistic varieties. In this definition, in this description, agency, it is at the center. And as a researcher and educator, my aim is to explore approaches that others have found useful and beneficial within varying educational contexts. And I've been studying critical pedagogies for a long time. I've been reading more and just immersing myself in other alternative pedagogies, such as engaged pedagogy or culturally sustaining pedagogies. My methodological approaches include consideration of my own capabilities and personal experiences, as well as my desire to see the world differently. This is what I want to do and continue to do the rest of my life. And I was a teacher, a K-12 teacher in Mexico before coming to the US and finishing first my MA, then I went back to Mexico again, and then I came back. And when I say come back, went back to Mexico is the border. I'm from Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua. And so I've been crossing the border back and forth my whole life. But I was working as a K-12 teacher in Mexico. And I also volunteer with some organizations. And in these organizations, we were within the governmental open education system. So I was working with some students who had many struggles, many were in gang membership, or others were struggling with just mental illnesses or addictions. And so I experienced a lot of struggles in the classroom, and that's when I found critical pedagogies to be very useful. And of course, here in the US, I'm working with very different population of students. However, I still find that critical pedagogies and these other pedagogies that I mentioned here are working very, very, very well for me and many other colleagues. So this is where I am and where we are in 2021. Yes, we have made substantial progress, but still one main predicament resides in the fact that as educators, we're invested in Latinx bilingual students' attainment of an ideal proficiency in standard varieties, and we want them to achieve social, academic, and professional success. This is what I want and what we want. And it is complex, and we acknowledge that, right? The complexity in acquiring academic language is clearly exposed in the context of Spanish and English bilingual students, because they have different opportunities of access to both languages here in the US, and many of whom are in Spanish courses for heritage speakers experience different levels and different methodologies. And there are many elements, but some elements that we really need to take into account is that there is a class-based language difference in the linguistic repertoires of Mexican and Latin American immigrants who speak stigmatized varieties of Spanish, and that serve as models for bilingual students in our courses. And additionally, as researchers and educators, we often do not problematize also the racist ideologies implicit in this discourse. So it is not only about social class. There are many racial linguistic ideologies here. If we ignore the interactional resources bilingual students bring to their academic experiences, as well as the ways in which they are capable of exercising agency in negotiating these class and racial subtexts, we risk misinterpreting language variation as unrelated to sociocultural and racial bias. So my proposal is that we acknowledge these, that we do not ignore these elements. Making these classes and racial linguistic dynamics of students' own and others' language use an explicit learning objective in its own right is central to fostering the critical pedagogical materials and curricula we are proposing to develop here. And this pedagogical proposal is based on critical language awareness, and following Paulo Freire, Brazilian Paulo Freire, from a movement that started in the 60s, then developed in the 70s with his critical pedagogies. Another linguist, writer, scholar, Norman Fairclough, proposes the model of critical language awareness that allows educators and learners to critically study how power relations work implicitly through language. And critical language awareness allows us to deconstruct the ideologies behind language forms, ideologies of race, class, gender, and other intersectional elements. And what is at stake in developing this type of critical literacy in the language classroom is to increase students' critical knowledge and not just their awareness. What I'm proposing here is that we focus not only on the language, critical language awareness, but on the historical, cultural, political, and social dimensions of language use. Latinx students gain the means through which to construct their identities through their own bilingual practices, but only if we give them the whole context. So I'm proposing to expand this critical language awareness model. And I've been doing this for the last 10 years. As I mentioned before, I work as the founding director of the Spanish Heritage Language Program at the University of Oregon. I had a wonderful team there. And currently, Dr. Sergio Loza is the current director of that program. And I'm so excited and happy because he's doing a fantastic work over there. And I'm still in contact with the team and continue sharing insights and materials with them. However, I've moved to UC Riverside, and now I'm continue collaborating with this team of wonderful scholars, women from the Midwest. My colleague Monia Cabal, Annalisa Taylor, and Luz Idi Hernandez, and we are developing this pedagogical approach. We started our collaboration since I was at the U of O, and we're continuing now that I am in Riverside. So I've not been doing this alone, and this, I want to emphasize this. We shouldn't be alone, struggling, trying to find out the best ways of teaching our students. We can collaborate. So through many meetings, workshops, meetings like this one, bringing speakers, we trained for a long time. We have been training for a long time. And we agreed that we need to make critical pedagogy accessible and created a national network of educators dedicated to taking direct action towards social justice. And for us, after many reflections, we agree that non-academic outcomes are as important as academic ones. So students' racial identity and sense of belonging are a priority in our approach. GPA is important, how they perform in class is important, but for us, non-academic outcomes are as important as well. And let me start giving you examples, concrete examples of all these, right? I'm speaking in a little bit more abstractly about methodologies and language awareness, but what do we do in the classroom, right? Exactly. So this is an example of exercise, an exercise that is, it could be the first exercise after your icebreaker in a class. And of course, you can adapt this to different levels. So we designed this activity to first talk about myths about language myths, and or beliefs that people have in general terms, right? So we show students a table like this. The original table in the exercise has 10 items. This is just an example with 4. And we ask them, okay, with a partner, read the following quotes from about language, about these myths, and decide if they are valid or not for you, as from what you know right now. And so tell us if it's false or true. For example, news broadcasters on TV and the internet do not have accents. And a lot of people believe this, right? Because they speak in the quote unquote most normalized way or standardized way. Another example would be Joanna is not doing well in math because her dad speaks to her in Spanish and her mom speaks to her in English, etc., right? So we give them these phrases and they report back to us what they think, we discuss them, what do you think? And then we ask them for step 2 to read about these myths. And we pick this reading, 10 myths about language busted by linguists, but you can have another reading, right? There are many readings and good readings that dismantle these myths. So after reading these, it is just like 2 pages or 3 pages. It's not a long reading. In teams, they have to answer step 2 and they have to correlate with the myths, these sentences with the myths. And the myths are, for example, myth 2, only other folks have accents. And then that will correspond to number 1. Maybe sentence number 4, English and Spanish are more developed language than Zapotec and Mixtec because they have produced more literary works. So that will correspond with number 5, some languages are primitive. And then we discuss this, right? And we bring the awareness of all these myths about language. So this is a really meta-linguistic conversation that fosters this critical language awareness in students. Another example of what we do in the classroom is just talk about colonization, right? Openly, provide the historical context, all the elements, not in a very extensive way, but maybe in relation to language and how language, standardized language and La Real Academia has been founded and et cetera, et cetera. And then we talk about decolonization. So decolonization refers to the process of recentering the points of linguistic, cultural, and political reference from the Eurocentric perspective and the realities of the people who live in places that experience colonization. For example, the Americas, Latin America, or here in the US. So by openly bringing these topics, we can also talk more precisely about the language that we use that reflect these values, these Eurocentric values that have not been very inclusive. For example, the term lower class. And again, this is an example of a longer table. But here for space and time, I'm just giving you 3 examples. Lower class, well, we are proposing in the class to use working class better. But also we open the discussion to maybe other possibilities. Maybe students come up with a better term, right? In each classroom. Students are sometimes more creative with these than ourselves. And we explain why, right? Well, for example, the terms high and low communicate values and prejudices, many times implicit. So working class is a more neutral form we can use to refer to a socioeconomic group with less access to economic and cultural capital. And here we are dismantling the myth of meritocracy, right? And so on and so forth. So we talk about saying bad English, bad Spanish might not be the best way, right? Let's talk about access, linguistic access, how some varieties are more privileged than others because they have more power, and so on and so forth. So this is a way of bringing critical language awareness. And of course, maybe you're already thinking about other ways, right? Other words, other examples that you could use. So the point with this is to valorize, but also provide legitimacy to the language that our communities use, Latinx communities use. Educators must not only promote linguistic valorization, but also advocate for the validity of their students' full linguistic repertoires in a wide range of social contexts, including not only the domestic, but also formal and public domains. It is important that we tell students, well, the way you speak, the way we speak, we can use it also in other contexts. Politicians use the language of their communities as well in formal contexts. It's just that they find ways and moments where to use it. And this is important because it is not only important that we tell them your language is valid, but that we use it and legitimate these uses in the classroom. And here there is an important component of agency. sometimes we feel that we don't have agency, that we have to follow this curriculum and or this textbook or this program, but we can make changes, and allowing for teacher and student agency should be understood as a commitment to continue self-reflection. It doesn't mean that we are going to change to these exercises, for example, that I show you. We should always be questioning these things and creating new ones, and maybe adjusting, right? We should be in continuous reflection. So critical literacy acknowledges multiple access of knowledge and difference production. Teachers must become border crossers along with their students. Teachers cannot engage in students' transformation without first moving beyond the teacher's self, allowing disagreement, disharmony, and dissonances within the self and with students. This methodology is not the easiest one, I would say, but it is good. Let me tell you more about this. So after many years working with this, I proposed this critical literacy immersed in a sociocultural linguistic context. So based on previous research I've done and other previous research that it has been done in language, I propose this term, critical sociocultural linguistic literacy. And this proposal has evolved within our research and pedagogical team to allow language students to exercise their own sociolinguistic agency and negotiate their own process of identity formations within their own particular context. Let me tell you, I am not teaching the same in Riverside, California, as I was teaching before in Oregon. I have had to adjust. CSLL challenges researchers, educators, and learners to analyze ethno-racial, gender, and class antagonisms that only become comprehensible when analyzing intersectional social structures. And it goes beyond the social critique present in original critical pedagogies and critical language awareness approaches that were based only mostly on class analysis. So we want to acknowledge all the multifaceted intersectional identity formation, as well as multiple opportunities across campus, across schools, and in the community toward literacy and language development. And so we take into account, as I was saying at the beginning of the talk, racial linguistic ideologies and other intersectional factors such as gender and ability, indigeneity, etc. And it is very important that we not only change our practices in the classroom, but it's not going to be congruent if we don't change the assessment. So from the beginning, our team understood that we were attempting to ensure linguistic validation, legitimation, inheritance, access, and expertise, but we needed to change how we assess students. And let me tell you, this was difficult, right? We were still being invested in traditional ways, but we consciously questioned these traditional learning objectives, and these at the end genuinely transform our pedagogical practices. It is not an easy path, but at the end, it is a much honest, let's say. So how do we, did we change this assessment? We proposed this way, and we came up with 4 categories of can-do statements for critical sociocultural linguistic literacy. The first one is related to implicit language ideology. So taking the actual can-dos, we thought, well, this is great because it is centered on the student's agency. So that a student can reflect and say, yeah, I can identify implicit language ideologies in cultural products like a song or a video of people speaking. The second sphere or element is the historical events and context, as I mentioned before, right? It is not only that we focus on the language forms, but explaining the whole social context around it with historical facts. And also the complex social dynamics and power structures that exist. And also that all words, phrases, pronunciations express other social meanings besides their literal meaning, right? A word such as guajolote means something else. It's not the same as the synonym pavo, right? It expresses its origins from the Nahuatl language. It expresses meanings of indigeneity. So we have to bring these to the awareness and the knowledge that we're creating in the classroom. And some examples, some more concrete examples of how we apply these categories. For example, in the first one, with the language ideologies, one statement that is more specific could be, I can identify attitudes towards language and their underlying ideologies as represented in popular culture. Another example regarding the historical context, I can explain how contact with other languages can contribute to language variation. And this could be a statement that evaluates, for example, a video showing Spanglish, and why people do these things like code switching. Well, we study how this is not unique from the US. It has happened whenever languages are in contact. And we have other examples here for the other categories. For example, in the complex social dynamics, I can explain the difference between prescriptive and descriptive approaches to analyze language. And I can give examples of the ways in which language varies in different styles. So here I'm referring to, for example, a style as in how, quote unquote, valley girls speak, okay? Or how certain actors or actresses speak, or people from these social group, right? Well, let's bring other groups. I am showing how old I am by saying valley girls, but for sure there are other social categories that are newer and that students know better, and that we can bring to the classroom and analyze and show the social context and the vocabulary and why do you think people speak like this, etc., etc. Okay, this is what we do. And but also I want to just briefly give you an overall introduction to what I'm trying to do with research, right? And it has been difficult, honestly, because this is something that it has not been done much in higher education or in Spanish heritage programs yet. So I have been exploring ways of doing this, and that's why collaboration is very important, because you need many minds on this. So the first attempt that I did still at the University of Oregon was developing some surveys for Spanish heritage language courses. And we had two, well, they still have two classes that are only for Spanish heritage language students. And these are intermediate level, but they're the first classes they take when they enter to the program. They're lower division classes, and they're called Herencia Latina 1 y Herencia Latina 2, to 18 to 28. And in a single term, they completed this survey that I developed. And the survey assessed their language ideologies and awareness in 2 significant points: early in the term and at the end of the term. And most of the students at the University of Oregon at the time were second generation, and most of them have spent almost all their lives in Oregon. Some of them were from California, but they have spent most of their lives in Oregon. And so I asked them to respond correct, incorrect, because that's a more neutral language, right? I didn't want to use more linguistic terminology like grammaticality or something like that. So I just asked them, does this sound correct or incorrect? And tell me why, and if you have comments. So I developed 30 phrases the students evaluated, including words from different categories of stigmatization. So we know that words such as porche that come from English and we have adapted to Spanish are many times prohibited in the classroom, or just they are stigmatized, right? Because they come from English. Some others are less adapted. Other are called vernacular, such as forms as ancina or aiga. Others are more in the category of caló. Some people understand them as slang, Mexican slang. And we included some distractors. And we conducted this study at the University of Oregon, and I want to mention that we conducted this at the Western Illinois University, and those results are in the way of being published. But this is first from the University of Oregon. So these are the sentences. And for example, le dije a mi hermano que viniera, pero pues no quiso, right? So the target element is pues. In number 2, mi amiga y yo nos fuimos de shopping ayer. So you can see that the target is shopping. So I wanted to give them the word in a carrier sentence. And so they answered this type of questionnaire. And in summary, quantitatively, there were differences. As you can see in this graph, the proportion of correct judgments increased over time. And in the 218, the Herencia Latina 1, students responded some amount of these sentences that they were correct and some that they were incorrect. But by the time, and many of the students were the same, by the time they were in 228, the second course of the sequence, they had increased the number of items that they qualified as correct. This could mean many things, right? I acknowledge this. But maybe also it shows that they are changing their attitudes. At least that shows that they are changing their attitudes. And that's why I conducted more follow-up studies. In one study, I asked them the same classes. I asked them to also write their opinions about other sentences with other elements that are also stigmatized, such as the so-called velarization of coda, that is a PTK, and I'm going to give you an example because this is very abstract. And also the redundancies, like when we say, súbete para arriba, right? Well, if you are going para arriba, you don't have to say súbete. So the redundancies are also stigmatized in Latin America, Spain, and many places. But a lot of our students say this, and I sometimes say this. So one example of the other, the velarization, is the pronunciation of, for example, Pepsi as Pepsi, and I have a video here to show you of an advertisement in Argentina. So this is very spread across all over the Spanish-speaking world, okay? It's not just our students, it's everywhere, or the United States, it's everywhere.
Mostaza, ¿se dice Newells o Newells?
Newells, así, con ñ.
Si tomás Pepsi, ahorrás. Si tomás Pepsi, también.
Con Pepsi, la comida de avión no parece comida de avión.
Si tomás Pepsi, ahorrás. Si tomás Pepsi, también. ¿Mostaza es offside u orside?
Para mí es offside, sin duda.
Si tomás Pepsi, ahorrás. Si tomás Pepsi, también.
Okay, so you get the idea. And also we decided to include this because we recognize that students themselves sometimes make fun of their parents speaking as second language as speakers of English. Like I pronounce these things like this, Starbucks, right? Or Facebook or Pepsi or Spotify. So this is present in what students already know. They are already aware of these stigmatized elements in their family members or parents. Most students are second generation and on. And so I was observing how they were making fun of these forms. So I say, oh, okay, let's include them in the study and see their awareness about this and what they say. And so I developed this questionnaire. For example, the phrases that carry these elements where algunas personas escuchan mal cuando pronuncian algunas palabras como Pepsi en lugar de Pepsi, etcétera, etcétera. And so I want to show you here the qualitative results that are very interesting. So at the beginning, again, it's not that they were too aware. Por ejemplo, yo he escuchado todos de estos ejemplos y no suena mal, right? This reveals some of the struggles that students may experience while trying to learn to avoid using the marginalized variants. So we have to take into account this, that sometimes we tell them in class, well, this is wrong, or don't say this. But if they don't have the awareness, they may feel confused, right? Or they may feel like, why is this bad if I use it all day or all the time? And in the second group, the first time they show more critical awareness in language ideologies, as I show in the quantitative graph. For example, some people have accents and I catch what they are trying to say is an accent, not bad education. So this already reflects what we have been talking about in class. They say, oh, it's an accent. There are different accents. Or no puedes discredit gente just because of how they speak. And this sentence obviously shows an attitude, right? I think that we cannot know, but the student might be just showing some attitude there, like, I'm gonna do Spanglish here. And in the second group, at the end, we observe more awareness. Por ejemplo, mi padre dice palabras como pizza y Pepsi y él sabe todo de inglés y español. Si alguien es bilingüe, nadie puede decir que no son inteligentes con los lenguajes. So he or she is already defending her posture. And what is correct? Spanish, and who gets to decide? Already asking, right? Challenging these ideologies. And some other comments reflected even greater critical awareness. La persona que mezcla inglés con español es muy inteligente y todos tienen una identidad. No más porque mezclas los dos idiomas no dice que no tienes una identidad. So again, showing some agency and challenging these ideologies. However, I want to say that this is a long process. And these statements do not mean that students have already changed their own language ideologies, right? Because some other students say, well, todos aprendimos español y como en diferentes maneras y como en todo, algunos hablan mejor que otros. This person is still saying, well, there are some better ways. So this is a long process. And also in this sentence, we can see, I know my Spanish is not excellent, but that is why I'm taking Spanish in order to improve. So the ability of a speaker to become more aware of her own language ideologies is a long process, and deciding to change them or their language use may take time or never happen. And this is part of allowing agency. If the student wants to use only standard language, which we also teach, well, it's their own choice, right? We are not here to create another paradigm of telling students what to do, being condescending or patronizing them or taking decisions for them. They can take their own decisions, but more informed. So these results indicate that SHL students are capable of developing a broader critical communicative competence if and when they are encouraged to discern the social meanings of linguistic styles and to articulate how their own linguistic decisions shape and are shaped by social values that either perpetuate or resist, right, or challenge these oppressive structures. And this model, critical sociocultural linguistic literacy, engages students in challenging all content, right, in class. We encourage them to, okay, we're saying this, but let's question. And reframes language education so that it fully serves students, particularly those who have been minoritized. This reframing should no longer be a matter of choice. We must start doing this more and more if we really want to produce social change. The first steps toward achieving these goals as educators is to fully explore our own biases and linguistic ideologies in relation to all these elements: race, ethnicity, class, gender, ability, sexuality, among others, and to reevaluate how these beliefs inform our educational practices and our assessment, and how we adhere to paradigms of social hierarchies in general. And we are conducting more studies, and we're collaborating with other colleagues in other sectors, in the East Coast as well. And I'm expanding now with these studies, also with my colleague Eve Higby in East Bay, Cal State East Bay, and with a group of graduate students. And now we have funding, which is very welcome, especially a new grant that we just got from the Mellon Foundation. And I'm very grateful that we can continue all these. Thank you very much. And please let me know what you think and if you have questions.